All right, we are on week 11, which is crazy to think about. I hope you guys had, let me adjust. Hope you had a happy Halloween. But yeah, week 11, chapter 15.2, we're going to talk about skeletons in the Wary Royal Tomb site, El Castillo de Hammurabi, Peru, circa 600 to 1000 current era. So before we start going over this, really the questions are: think about who the source, why it was written, who was the audience, who were the main issues, what were the main issues, and how did they encourage our understanding of an issue or event. What questions are left unanswered by the source? What does the source either reveal a problem or help solve an area of contention? Does the source represent a particular bias? How are the sources useful? To whom and how have they been useful? Are they reliable? What evidence supports the source? What evidence contradicts it? Are our questions. So, like always, I was looking at these and going, before I went to the chapter and went to the table of context, again, how I pick it, and I just thought, skeletons in the Royal Tomb site sounds pretty cool to me. I just finished beating a game called Dark Souls, and at the end of this game, there's a lot of skeletons, so I was like, all right, keep it on the same topic. The only problem is it's really short part. Though if I could do a picture and do almost 7 minutes with just a picture, we can do this. And so it talks about very recently, 2013, so not even 10 years ago, several bodies were found in these tombs. 3 of them were wrapped in linen. It says here 3 have been queens, and they were buried with gold and silver jewelry and brilliantly painted ceramics. However, 6 of the skeletons were not wrapped in textiles, but instead positioned on top of the burials. Archaeologists have concluded that many people have been sacrificed for the benefits of the others. And so it's weird thinking this mass grave. In modern terms, mass graves are always a bad thing. It's a bunch of people who've died very recently, and they just clump together. We see them in the Holocaust. We see them in... There's rumors of North Korea, but we don't know for sure. But that's also none of our business right now. Who is the audience? Archaeological students, really. I just started my geography class 2 weeks ago, so it's really big and interesting to learn about populations and how different cultures have been treated throughout time. And that kind of ties into this. I believe I brought that up last week, but I'm not 100% sure. Who's the audience? This seems very archaeological. Why did this happen? Could also be a very good historical question we could ask. Is why were these buried such a certain way? We see in Egypt they had very certain burial practices for pharaohs, wives of pharaohs, very religious figures, high priests. We saw that, I think, week 1 or 2 with the temples, with the pyramids. And each pharaoh tried to outdo the next with a different major tomb. So, could this be a connection to that? Could it be a very similar reasoning behind it? Main issues, no issues. More questions on why? We'll get to that later. How do they understand our event of this issue? How do they help impact our understanding? That these people must have had a very important social hierarchy into their lives, that it mattered enough where people were buried with gold, silver, and other textiles and ceramics. Stuff that we see in our life very beautiful and powerful. So with that, it's like, yes, but why was it buried in such a certain way? Why were there 6 other bodies? 6 of the skeletons were not. And that's my question, is why? Like, yes, pharaohs were buried with wives, but the wives weren't immediately, like, why that? Does the source reveal a problem or help solve? This brings up more problems. Why were they buried this way? That's a big thing for me. Why? What did this culture do that we just haven't seen? Warrior royal tombs. So in Peru, we feel when we talk about certain things like this, it's Egypt, it's Mexico, Spaniards are really brought up, but it's never Peru. We talk about Machu Picchu, Peru a lot in our modern culture. In America, I feel as more of a science fiction-y way. The biggest one being in The Exorcist with Pazuzu, the demons of the southeast winds, who was a real thing for them. Like, that just wasn't made up for that movie. But why was this such a big deal for them to be buried in this way? Does it represent a bias? No. This is just a fact of what happened in 2013, what they uncovered in 2013. There's no particular bias here. Are these sources useful? Yes, but not in a historical standpoint, an archaeological standpoint, yes. I feel like there's something we can learn without further evidence. That's the big thing, is the further evidence. We can really see, here's the page, there's this text up top, and on this, hey, probably not the best way to hold my book. On this bottom where my pinky is, and at the top on this page with my thumb, that's really all we have with that image. The skull and spine. So, there's no bias, it's just more information is wanted here. Are they useful? Yes and no. It's useful to know when and where these bodies were dug up, but it's not useful to what were they doing and why were these people buried in such a way. To whom would they have been useful? This is useful to archaeological students. If they're trying to look for more connections across Peru or even just South Africa or South America in general, you can go back to this source, look, hey, this happened in Peru, this happened in 2013, it's 2023, 10 years ago, we found the same thing. What connections can we make? And that would be the biggest thing. Are they reliable? Yes. It's not like, oh, a what if. Like a couple weeks ago, we had to talk about the wedding. That was a poem. So that's not like a what if this happened. This is just them uncovering bodies. How do these bodies correlate to us now? And what can we learn from those bodies? But I'm looking at, there's not much in the way of them not being reliable. What even supports a source? Obviously, the 9 bodies dug up is a big factor of just support. You can't falsify 9 dead people, especially like that. And whatever contradicts it, there's no evidence that could contradict it. There's literally dead bodies stacked on top of each other in the means of some sort of benefit of archaeological data. Then we go on to source analysis. What I learned about the historical context from these materials. Further stuff is needed, but it says don't look at any outside sources. I guess with the historical context from what we learn is that important people will be buried in important ways. Mainly with Egypt, we see the pyramids. We see a lot of Chinese people. Wow. Chinese royalty being buried in very special ways. So I feel if you are royal, you are buried in a special way. That's something we can learn from these older cultures. I don't have much more to really say than that. Kind of a really interesting and different than what we've normally seen, especially Peru. Peru, I feel, is not a real big country that we talk about in such a way, especially when it comes to a more ancient world. Peru and South America in general, I feel, just isn't mentioned until more modern eras. And granted, this is a more modern one, but it still feels, it's pre-plague, which still is very, excuse me, still feels very old, especially to somebody growing up in this sort of history era. It just feels older than it really is. So, yeah, I don't have much more to add, so I'll just go ahead and upload this, and I will start on that primary source, the task for the week. Week 11, crazy to think about. There's only realistically 5 more weeks after this, which is kind of cool to think about in a way. one semester closer to that degree. Yeah, I don't have anything else, so see you next time.